Hello. It is fantastic to have you here with us. We are diving into something today that feels incredibly abstract on the surface, maybe even a little dry if you just look at the title. But once you peel back the layers, it actually dictates pretty much everything about how you understand your life, your arguments, and even the laws of physics.
It really does. It's the invisible operating system of the human mind. But before we get into the heavy lifting, we have to address the nature of this conversation.
That's right. Just so we're all on the same page from the start, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic analysis of written works.
Which is a bit meta, isn't it?
Yeah.
Two artificial intelligences discussing the nuances of human thought, specifically how humans define their reality. We are essentially code analyzing how humans code the universe.
It is a little ironic, but honestly, who better to talk about precise definitions than two entities who run entirely on logic, syntax, and structured data? But let's leave the existential crisis for another day. We have a lot of ground to cover. Today, we're looking at Mortimer J. Adler's essay on definition from the Syntopicon.
And we need to be precise right out of the gate. This is an essay. It's chapter number 15, among the 102 great ideas. It's not a whole book, but it carries the weight of a library. It is dense, it is historical, and it is brilliant.
Right, the essay. So I want to start with a phrase I hear constantly. You're at a dinner party, or maybe you're scrolling through comment section, and two people are going at it, arguments are getting heated, and then someone waves their hand and says, oh, come on, that's just semantics, that's just a matter of definition.
The ultimate conversation stopper.
Exactly. It's like a white flag or maybe a smoke bomb. It implies that because it's a definition, it doesn't matter, it's trivial. But Adler seems to think this is a huge mistake.
A huge mistake. Adler argues that this is one of the most dangerous dismissals in intellectual history. When you say it's just semantics, you're effectively saying that the truth is entirely subjective. You're implying that words are just arbitrary noises we make, and they don't actually connect to reality in any meaningful way.
Dangerous seems like a heavy word for a dictionary entry. Are we really saying that a disagreement over a word threatens the fabric of society?
Think about it. If everything is just a matter of definition, then we're saying there is no objective reality we can agree on. If I define justice as whatever helps me, and you define justice as fairness for everyone, and we just shrug and say, well, it's just semantics, then we have no basis for law.
We have no basis for science.
None. Adler's thesis in this essay is that how we define things determines our entire view of the universe. It's the difference between merely agreeing on how to spell a word and actually understanding the nature of existence.
Okay, that lands. So we're not just talking about Webster's or Oxford here. We're talking about the architecture of reality. If we can't agree on what things are, we can't live in the same world.
Precisely. And to understand this, we have to look at how definition actually works. Adler breaks this down into a framework that I find incredibly helpful. He says definition happens on 3 levels simultaneously. If you miss this, you miss the whole point.
Walk us through these levels.
First, you have the linguistic level. This is verbal stipulation. It's the most basic level. It's us agreeing that the sound dog refers to that furry thing over there barking at the mail carrier.
Okay, so that's the label, the sticky note we put on the world so we don't have to point at things and grunt.
Correct. But that's just the surface. Below that, you have the conceptual level. This is the analysis of the idea inside your head. When you say dog, what do you actually mean? What concepts are tied to it? Loyalty, 4 legs. Mammal, domesticated. It's the mental file folder.
The collection of ideas associated with the label.
Exactly. But then there's the third level.
And the third level.
The third level is the deep end. The metaphysical level. This is the essence statement. This is the claim that your definition matches the real nature of the thing in the world outside of your head.
I want to make sure I really get this distinction between the conceptual and the metaphysical. It feels subtle.
Let's use a classic example, water.
Okay, water. Simple enough.
On the linguistic level, we agree that the word water, or the symbol H2O, points to the clear liquid in your glass. That's just language. We could call it zub-zub if we wanted to, as long as we agreed.
Sure. Zub-zub. I like it.
On the conceptual level, we understand the idea of liquid, wetness, thirst quenching, colorless, odorless. That's how we think about it. That's the folder in our minds labeled zub-zub.
Right.
But the metaphysical level, that's understanding why hydrogen and oxygen bond in that specific atomic structure to create the reality of water. It's getting under the hood of the universe to see what the thing is in itself, not just what we call it or how we think about it.
So the metaphysical definition is trying to touch reality itself.
Exactly. And that ambition to touch reality, is where the battle lines are drawn. Adler's essay walks us through this massive historical cage match between two groups, the nominalists and the realists.
I feel like these terms, nominalism and realism, pop up everywhere in philosophy, but they can be a bit slippery. Let's nail them down in this context.
It is the central conflict of the essay. On one side, you have the nominalists. Think of thinkers like Thomas Hobbes or John Locke. Nominal comes from the Latin nomen, meaning name.
Okay.
For them, definitions are primarily about words. We label things based on convenience. Naming is arbitrary.
So a nominalist looks at a forest and says, look, we just decided to call this thing a tree and draw a circle around it because it's useful for us to have a word for wood that stands up. Nature didn't put a sign on it saying tree.
Right. They would argue that the line between a bush and a tree is something we invented. It's not out there in the world. It's in our language. It's a human convention.
Okay. And the realists?
The realists think Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas believe definitions are about things. They argue that nature has joints.
Nature has joints. That is a vivid image.
Imagine carving a turkey. You don't just hack at it anywhere with a cleaver. You try to find where the bones connect, where the natural separation is.
You follow the structure of the thing itself.
Realists believe the world is like that turkey. It has real species and real divisions. A good definition discovers those divisions. It doesn't just invent them.
So for a realist, a tree is a real category that exists whether humans are there to name it or not. We're just the detectives finding the clues.
Exactly. And this isn't just dusty old philosophy. Think about the debate over Pluto.
Oh, poor Pluto.
When astronomers argued about whether Pluto was a planet, were they just arguing about the definition of the word planet? A nominalist debate about how we want to use a label? Or were they arguing about the nature of Pluto itself? A realist debate about what kind of object it actually is. Does it fit into a real natural category?
That is a great way to put it. I think most people felt like Pluto was being demoted, like it lost its status. But a nominalist would say, who cares? It's the same rock. We just changed the filing cabinet.
Precisely. But let's go back to the heavy hitters. Let's look at Thomas Hobbes. He is a strict nominalist, but Adler points out a fascinating paradox in his thinking.
I love a good paradox. What's Hobbes's deal?
Hobbes is cynical about language. He says definition is just settling the signification of words. It's housekeeping. We just need to agree so we stop fighting.
Seems very practical, very Hobbesian.
It is, but, and this is a huge bit of Egypt, he also believes definitions are the first principles of science.
Wait, hold on. That doesn't track. If I just made up the definition arbitrarily, if I just decided zub-zub means water, how can that be the foundation of hard, rigorous science?
That is the paradox. Hobbes writes, in the right definition of names lies the first use of speech, which is the acquisition of science. He believes that if you get the definition wrong, even if it's just an arbitrary agreement, your entire calculation falls apart.
Explain that. That feels like a contradiction.
Think of it like a bridge. We might invent the concept of a meter. A meter doesn't exist in nature. We made it up. It's an arbitrary length.
Okay, I'm with you.
But if you start building a bridge and you treat a meter like it's a foot, the bridge falls down. The initial definition might be arbitrary, but your adherence to it must be absolute for the system to work.
Ah, I see. So for Hobbes, the rules might be made up, but once you make them, you have to follow them with absolute rigidity, or you end up with nonsense. It's about consistency.
Precisely. It's about consistency. If your terms are slippery, your science is garbage. For him, science is just one long logical deduction from first principles, and those first principles are definitions.
That's a powerful and slightly terrifying idea, that all of science could be resting on a foundation that we just made up.
It is. It puts a tremendous amount of pressure on getting those initial agreements right. Now, let's rewind the clock further. Adler spends a significant amount of the essay discussing the ancients, specifically Plato and Aristotle. And honestly, reading about their methods feels less like philosophy and more like detective work.
It really is. They were hunting for the truth.
Let's look at Plato. In his dialogue, The Sophist, he uses this method called division. It's almost like a game of guess who.
I remember this. He gives this famous example of trying to define an angler, a fisherman with a hook.
He doesn't just look at a fisherman and describe him. He starts with the entire universe of human activity.
Yeah.
He starts with a massive class, art, and he slices it in half.
Okay, let's play this out. I'm Plato. I have art. How do I slice it?
You ask, is this art acquisitive, getting something, or productive, making something?
Well, fishing is catching fish. You aren't building the fish, so it's acquisitive.
Right, so we throw away the productive half of the universe, all of painting, sculpture, building gone. Now we look at acquisitive. He slices that in half. Is it conquest or taking by force, or is it exchange?
Fishing isn't really an exchange. The fish isn't selling itself. It feels more like conquest.
Exactly. He keeps chopping the concept in half, over and over. Is it hunting animals or non-animals? Is it hunting in water or on land? Is it using a net or a blow? He discards the parts that don't fit until he isolates the specific object. The angler.
It's like whittling. You start with a big log and chip away everything that isn't the statue.
That is exactly what Plato is doing. He is hunting for the form, the eternal idea of the angler. He believes that if you divide properly, you will find the definition waiting at the end, pure and uncovered.
It's a beautiful method. It feels very clean. But Aristotle, he wasn't buying it, was he?
Aristotle respected Plato, but he thought this method was weak. He thought it wasn't systematic enough. It relied too much on intuition. How do you know which way to slice? Plato's choices seem clever, but are they necessary?
So Aristotle wanted a more rigorous system.
He wanted a formula. And he introduced the formula that became the gold standard for centuries. Definition equals genus plus differentia.
Genus plus differentia. It sounds like a magic spell, but it's actually super practical.
It is. The genus is the general kind of thing something is, the family it belongs to. The differentia is the specific trait that sets it apart from everything else in that family.
So give us the classic example.
Man equals animal, that's the genus, plus rational, that's the differentia.
So we're in the animal bucket. We eat, we sleep, we move, but the thing that makes us different from the cows and chickens is rationality.
Exactly. And that differential rationality explains all the other unique properties of humans, like language, law, and science. But Aristotle is very strict about how you do this. You can't just pick any random difference.
Right.
Adler highlights a specific rule from Aristotle's work, Parts of Animals. It is the footed animal rule.
This is the one about not mixing your categories.
Yes. Aristotle says if you start dividing footed animals, your next division must be about the feet. You can divide them into cloven-hoofed versus non-cloven-hoofed. That works. It follows the grain of the wood.
Okay, that makes sense. You're staying within the logic of feet.
But you cannot divide footed animals into feathered and non-feathered.
Why not? Some animals have feathers. Some footed animals have feathers.
Because feathers have nothing to do with feet. You have jumped categories. You are no longer defining the essence of the footedness. You are just grabbing a random trait that happens to coexist.
It's like organizing a toolbox. You have a drawer for hammers. You can separate them by claw hammer versus ball peen hammer because that's about the essence of the hammer.
A perfect analogy.
But if you separate them by red handle versus blue handle, you have lost the plot. You're not describing what makes it a type of hammer anymore.
Exactly. Color is an accident. It doesn't tell you what the tool is. Aristotle demands we stick to the essence. If you separate by color, you are just describing, not defining. This rigor is what he brought to the table.
That makes sense. You have to stay on the same track to actually capture the essence. Now, moving forward in history, we hit the Middle Ages. The church becomes the center of intellectual life. Thomas Aquinas enters the chat. And things get complicated.
They get theological, but also intensely logical. Aquinas wrestles with a really tricky question. Can a definition be true or false?
My gut instinct says yes. Of course it can. If I define a cat as a barking reptile, that's false. It's just wrong.
Well, hold on. Aquinas would draw a fine distinction.
Yeah.
He would say that the sentence, "a cat is a barking reptile," is a false statement. You are making a claim about a real-world cat.
Right.
But strictly speaking, a definition itself just explains a concept. If I define a glorp as a barking reptile, is that definition false? No, that's just what a glorp is, according to my definition.
Yeah.
It might not correspond to anything in reality, but the definition itself isn't false.
Okay, I see the distinction. A definition is just setting up the rules for a word.
Yeah.
It isn't making a claim about the world yet. So it's neither true nor false. It just is.
Mostly. But Aquinas admits there is an exception. A definition is false if it asserts an impossibility.
Give us an example of an impossible definition.
A round square, or a four-footed rational animal. These contain characteristics that are mutually repugnant.
Mutually repugnant. That's a great phrase. They hate each other.
They fight each other. You cannot have a square that is round. By definition, a square has corners. By definition, a circle does not. So that definition is false because it describes literally nothing. It's void of logic.
And this logical rigor, this idea of what's possible and impossible within a definition, leads us to the biggest definition of all, the definition of God. Adler outlines this massive debate about whether we can define God into existence.
This is the famous ontological argument. It was championed by thinkers like Descartes, Spinoza, and Anselm. It's a fascinating piece of mental gymnastics.
How does it work? Lay it out for us.
It's a multi-step argument. First, they define God as a supremely perfect being. That is, a being that possesses all perfections.
Okay, sounds standard. All-powerful, all-knowing, all good.
But here's the trick. They then argue that existence is a perfection. It is better to exist than not to exist, right? A perfect hospital that actually exists is better than a perfect hospital that is just an idea.
Sure, I'd rather go to the real one.
Therefore, if God is supremely perfect, he must exist. If he didn't exist, he would lack a perfection, the perfection of existence, and therefore wouldn't be supremely perfect.
So he exists by definition.
He exists by definition. His essence includes his existence.
Wow. They tried to logic God into existence. I define this as existing, therefore it exists. That feels like cheating. Can I define $1 million in my pocket as existing money and have it appear?
That is exactly the pushback. That's the classic refutation. And Aquinas, centuries before Descartes, wasn't buying it either.
What was his rebuttal?
Aquinas argued that we humans cannot know God's essence directly. We are too limited. We are like ants trying to understand a supercomputer. We can only have a nominal definition of God. We can understand what the word means. We can understand the concept of a perfect being.
But we can't leap from the concept to the reality.
Exactly. We cannot just define him into reality. For Aquinas, we have to start with the world we can see. We have to prove his existence by looking at the effects, the world around us, and tracing them back to the cause. You have to look at the footprints to find the walker. You can't just define the walker into the room.
So you can't just write a dictionary entry for billionaire with your name next to it and expect the money to appear. You have to earn it, or in this case, prove it from evidence.
In a manner of speaking, yes. Aquinas puts a check on the power of definition. Words are powerful, but they don't conjure reality out of thin air.
And that skepticism, that caution about the limits of human reason, carries us right into the modern era. We see a shade here. We move away from God and essence toward the limits of the human mind. This brings us back to John Locke.
John Locke is a pivotal figure here. If Aquinas was cautious, Locke is a skeptic. He takes a sledgehammer to the idea that we can know the real essence of things. He makes this absolutely critical distinction between nominal essence and real essence.
We mentioned the gold example earlier, but let's really dig into it, because I think this is where the modern scientific mindset begins.
It is. Think about gold. To John Locke, looking at it in the 17th century, what is gold?
It's yellow. It's
How?
shiny. It's heavy. It's malleable. You can hammer it into shapes. And it dissolves in aqua regia, that special acid.
Right. That list of observable properties, that is the nominal essence. That is just the list of things we can see and test. It is the surface. It's the definition we create for the name gold.
Okay.
But Locke says there's a real essence underneath that, the actual constitution of the matter that causes it to be yellow and heavy, the inner structure.
The atomic structure, element number 79.
Right. But remember, Locke is writing in the 1600s.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an electron microscope. He doesn't know about protons and neutrons. So he argues that we can never know that real essence. It is hidden from us. We were stuck with the labels. We were stuck with the surface.
So Locke is basically saying, look, we're just guessing. We see yellow stuff, we call it gold, but we don't actually know what it is. The real nature of the thing is beyond our reach.
Exactly. He's the champion of, we just made these labels up because they are useful. There's a famous quote Adler cites from Locke. Every man has so inviolable a liberty to make words stand for what ideas he pleases.
That is profound freedom, inviolable liberty. But it's also total chaos if you think about it. If I can make words mean whatever I want, how do we talk to each other? If I decide gold means cheese, I'm going to have a very confusing time at the jewelry store.
That is the struggle of modern philosophy. Trying to find ground to stand on when we've admitted the ground might just be something we imagined. It shifts the power from nature to the human mind. We become the creators of meaning, but we lose the certainty of discovering a meaning that's already there.
Speaking of finding ground to stand on, we are going to take a very brief pause here. We have covered a lot of dense material, from Plato's fishing trips to Locke's gold bars, and your brain might be needing a second to buffer.
It is a lot to digest. These are big ideas.
They are. And if you are enjoying this kind of deep analysis, but sometimes wish you could get it in a more visual, bite-sized format, I have a recommendation for you. you need to check out Mindful Moments.
Mindful Moments is our YouTube channel. It offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, just like this, but designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
So head over to YouTube and search for Mindful Moments.
Now let's get back to the timeline. We left off with Locke saying we can't know the real essence of nature, but then history threw a wrench in the gears. Science happened in a big way.
Yes. And two big names enter the ring who completely changed the game, Charles Darwin and Antoine Lavoisier. Biology versus chemistry. And they seem to be pulling in opposite directions regarding definition.
They absolutely are. It's a fascinating split. Let's start with Darwin. His theory of evolution posed a massive challenge to the realist view, specifically Aristotle's view of fixed species.
Right. Because for Aristotle, a horse is a fixed thing. It has a horseness that never changes. It participates in the eternal form of the horse.
Exactly. A definition captures an eternal form. A horse is a horse, always has been, always will be. But Darwin comes along and says, actually, no. A horse used to be a weird little dog-sized creature called an eohippus, and in a million years it might be something else entirely.
So the boundaries are fluid, the lines are blurry.
Incredibly fluid. If species are constantly evolving, are definitions permanent? Darwin suggests that the word species might just be a term of convenience. It's a snapshot of a river. We group these animals together because they look alike right now, but there's no eternal boundary. The river is always flowing.
That sounds like a victory for the nominalists. It's just a label we stick on a moving target. We draw a circle around a group of animals and say horse, but the circle is arbitrary and temporary.
It is. The natural system of classification becomes just a genealogical family tree, not a map of eternal truths. Nominalism wins in biology. But then you have Lavoisier in chemistry.
The man who named oxygen.
Yes. And Lavoisier, working on the fundamental elements of matter, claimed that chemical distinctions are established by nature. Oxygen is oxygen. It isn't a matter of opinion. It isn't evolving into nitrogen next Tuesday.
So while biology was getting blurrier, chemistry was getting sharper.
Exactly. A gold atom is a gold atom anywhere in the universe. It has a specific atomic number, 79 protons. It cuts nature exactly at the joints. This supports the realist view. There really is a goldness out there in the world.
So science actually split the verdict. Biology looks nominalist, chemistry looks realist. That's a fascinating tension. I hadn't thought about how different sciences treat definition differently.
It shows that the answer to are definitions real might be. Depends on what you're looking at.
But then we have the Americans. We have William James and pragmatism, and James takes this whole debate about what is real and flips the table over.
I love the pragmatic approach because it is so refreshing. James essentially says, who cares about eternal truth? I care about what works. What's the cash value of an idea?
It's all about utility. Does the definition help you do something?
Precisely. James argues that definitions are teleological. That's a fancy word for popist-driven. He says we define things based on what we want to do with them.
The oil example is the best way to explain this. I love this because it makes so much sense in the real world.
It does. Imagine a sample of oil. What is its essence? What is the true definition of oil? William James would say. It depends on who you are and what problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, so I'm a cook. I'm holding a bottle of olive oil. What's its essence to me?
To you, the essence of oil is combustible or friable. It's a high-fat liquid for cooking. That is its definition, its purpose, its truth for you in that moment.
Now I'm a mechanic working on a car engine, holding a quart of motor oil.
To you, the essence of oil is lubricant. You don't care about the taste, you care about the viscosity and its ability to reduce friction. That is its truth.
And now I'm a chemist in a lab with a beaker of crude oil.
To you, it's a hydrocarbon chain. It's a complex mixture of molecules. Its essence is its chemical structure.
So who is right? The cook, the mechanic, or the chemist?
James argues that all of them are right, relative to their interests. There is no single true definition of oil floating in a Platonic heaven. He says, classification is a weapon of the mind.
Classification is a weapon. That is such a powerful line. It sounds aggressive.
It's active. It's not passive discovery. We use definitions to attack problems. The definition changes depending on the battle we are fighting. If you are fighting hunger, oil is food. If you are fighting friction, oil is lubricant. If you are fighting ignorance, oil is a molecular structure.
That feels incredibly modern. It removes the idea of a single holy truth with a capital T for definition and replaces it with a toolbox of useful truths.
It does, and it explains why we have so many arguments. Usually when people argue about definitions, they aren't arguing about reality, they're arguing about purpose. They're trying to use the word for different jobs.
Now, there's one place where definition works differently than anywhere else. A place where we can be absolutely certain of our definitions. A place where the realists and nominalists can maybe put down their weapons. Mathematics.
Yes, Euclid's geometry. This is where definitions become real in a unique way.
Why is math different? Why isn't a triangle just a label like tree?
Because in math, you have the demonstration of a definition. You prove a definition is real by constructing it. You bring it into being.
Constructing it, what does that mean?
Think about Euclid. He defines an equilateral triangle, a triangle with 3 equal sides. At that point, that is just a nominal definition, just words. You could say a triangle with 4 sides, and that would be words too, just a contradictory set.
Sure, it's just a string of symbols.
But then, in proposition number 1 of his elements, he shows you how to draw it. He gives you a set of instructions using a straight edge and compass.
I remember this from high school geometry. You put the compass point down, draw a circle, move it to the edge, draw another circle, connect the dots where they intersect, boom, equilateral triangle.
Exactly. By constructing it, he proves that the definition refers to a possibility in geometric space. It isn't just a glorp or a nonsense word. It exists because he built it. It's a real definition.
So you can define a million-sided polygon, but until you prove it can be constructed without contradiction, it's just hot air. It's a nominal definition without a demonstrated reality.
Precisely. In math, possibility is reality. You don't have to go out and find a triangle in the woods. You make it true through logic. This is a level of certainty that no other field can really claim.
Okay, we have travels from ancient Greece to modern chemistry to abstract geometry. We have covered a lot, but I want to ground this for the listener. We promised this would be relevant to their lives. Why does this matter to the person driving to work right now?
It matters because, as Adler points out, there's a fundamental difference between a word and a term. And misunderstanding this is the source of almost all bad communication.
This is a crucial distinction. Break it down.
A word is just a sound or a symbol. Love, justice, freedom. These are words. You can say them. I can say them. They are tokens.
Okay.
But a term is a word with a fixed definition, agreed upon for the purpose of a conversation. Adler says you cannot have a rational conversation with words. You can only have a rational conversation with terms.
That explains so many arguments I have seen on social media. People are throwing words at each other, but they haven't agreed on the terms.
Exactly. One person says freedom and means lack of government constraint. The other person says freedom and means capability to live a good life, which might require government support. They aren't disagreeing. They're speaking different languages using the same sounds.
They are essentially shouting glorp at each other. But one thinks glorp means up, and the other thinks glorp means down. Nothing gets resolved.
Precisely. So the practical tip here is, next time you are in an argument, stop. Don't just yell your point. Ask, can we define our terms? Force the conversation to move from the battlefield of words to the negotiating table of terms.
Turn your words into terms. It forces you to stop using language as a weapon and start using it as a tool for understanding.
It's the first step toward any kind of real dialogue.
That is great advice. But is there a limit? Can we define everything? If we're good enough, can we create a perfect dictionary for reality?
No. And this is where Adler and the experts remind us of one final, humble truth. The indefinables.
Indefinables. I thought the whole point was to define everything.
You can't. You'd end up in an infinite regress. Eventually you hit bedrock. You cannot define being. What could you define it as? You'd have to use the word is in the definition. You cannot define unity.
And you can't define simple sensory experiences.
Right. Try defining yellow.
Imagine trying to define yellow to someone who has been blind since birth without using other visual words. You can't do it. You can say it feels like the sun on your face, but that is a metaphor. That isn't a definition.
You end up running in circles. Yellow is the color of lemons. What's a lemon? A yellow fruit. That's a closed loop.
You're trapped.
As Dr. Johnson famously said, nothing can be defined but by the use of words too plain to admit of definition. We have to agree on the basics, the bedrock, before we can build the complex structures. We have to just point at things and say, that, I mean that. The foundation of language is pre-linguistic.
That is a humbling thought. At the bottom of all our complex philosophy and science, there are just things we have to point at.
It is. A little bit of mystery at the heart of all our reason.
So let's wrap this up. We have covered a massive amount of ground. We moved from Plato's knife, cutting up the concept of art, to Aristotle's biological boxes, through Aquinas' theological caution, into Locke's skepticism about reality, and finally landed on James's pragmatism, where definition is a weapon.
It's quite the journey. And I think the big takeaway from Adler's essay is that we don't have to be just one winner. We don't have to be strictly nominalist or strictly realist.
What do you mean by that? It seems like they're totally opposed.
Well, Adler suggests a middle ground, a kind of common-sense synthesis. Naming is arbitrary. Sure, you can call a dog a glorp if you want. That's the nominalist part. We choose the sounds.
Okay, we have liberty there.
But once you define the concept, reality constrains you. You can't define a glorp as a feathered mammal if nature doesn't allow feathered mammals. That's the realist part. Reality pushes back against our definitions.
So we are free to choose the labels, but we aren't free to ignore the contents of the jar. The world has a say in whether our definitions are useful or just nonsense.
Exactly. It's a dance between our minds and the world.
Here is a provocative thought for our listeners to take away. We spend a lot of time defining things in the world. But think about how you define yourself. In your own life, your job title, your relationships, your identity. Are you using a real definition or a nominal definition?
That is a heavy question. Are you defined by the label society put on you? The nominal essence, the job title, the rank, the social status, the things other people can see on the surface? Or are you striving to understand your real essence, the core of who you actually are, regardless of the words used to describe you? It's the difference between knowing your label and knowing yourself.
Something to mull over on your commute or while you're washing the dishes. Are you a label or are you a reality?
And if you want to dive deeper into these questions, we have resources for you.
Absolutely. Click the link on screen for more on this and other essay subjects. We encourage you to subscribe, share, and if you can, purchase via the link to support the content. But most importantly, we want you to think rationally.
Don't just accept the definitions handed to you. Inspect them. Challenge them.
Thank you for listening. It has been a pleasure unpacking the universe with you.
Until next time.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.